Hello, everybody. Another theater review on YouTube. Sounds crazy, no? Maybe so, but here on our little channel, it's what we do. We provide a pleasant yet thoughtful critique without breaking our proverbial necks. It isn't easy. You may ask, why do we do these reviews if they can be so challenging? Well, we do it because it's our passion. And how do we do it without losing ourselves or our tempers? That they can tell you in a few words. Openness to critical conversation. Hello, everybody.
I swear I'm not with him. Oh my God. Great start. Okay.
I know, right? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews. I am the co-producer of all things The Cup, Mackenzie, and I'm joined once again by my wonderful co-host, man who journeyed through Nicholas Nickleby with me, Mr. Ryan Borochovitz.
Yes.
Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Mac. Yes, we haven't done one of these, just you and I, since Nicholas Nickleby. So
I know.
Quite the treat to be jumping into this interesting documentary.
Right? Yes, indeed. And the documentary we are covering today is none other than from Broadway HD, and it is a documentary about the making and the impact of Fiddler on the Roof. And this 2019 documentary was directed by Max Lewkowicz. So we'll start with kind of how we came to the documentary, because this was a Max suggestion. I saw it when it premiered at the Hot Docs Film Festival here in Toronto. It was a packed house. We actually had live theatrical performers do some of the songs as a prelude to the show. I believe the director, or at least some of the production team, was there to introduce the documentary. And it's been, ever since then, one of my favorite documentaries. It's just a beautifully powerful piece. We'll get into the what was like seeing it with a big full packed house audience, something we don't get nowadays due to COVID. But yeah, it was a remarkable experience, and it is a wonderful documentary. Ryan, let's get into you in this documentary. Kind of. Oh right! Oh my goodness, Ryan, we haven't done this in so long.
It's been too long.
It's been too long. Well, in my cup, I just have water in my silver tankard because, yeah, if I drink tea at this time of night, I'll be put to sleep.
Yeah, that's fair. And I have the cup, and as always, orange pico tea.
Love it. And so let's get, so I guess we can kind of start with Ryan. What's your experience with the musical that inspired this documentary? And what are your initial thoughts on the documentary when I suggested it to you?
Okay, well, I have a long relationship. Tevye kind of at this point just feels like an old uncle type figure who comes in out of my life every so often. And, he makes me laugh, he makes me roll my eyes, but overall there's a special fondness there. I think actually Fiddler might have very well been one of the first plays I saw. There would a community theater company in Oakville, where I'm from, put it on when I was quite young. My synagogue, or at least the synagogue my family went to at the time, was doing a fundraiser just to kind of get the community out. Oakville has a very small Jewish community, and kind of wanted to support the fact that they were doing Fiddler at this community theater company, and did a fundraiser to generate interest. So my family took me to that, and I enjoyed it from the very beginning. I remember before going to see it, my dad sitting me and my brothers down and trying to explain the plot to us, because I guess we were too young to just go in blind and understand what is a shtetl, what is an arranged marriage. These are kind of not necessarily the most obvious concepts to I don't even remember how old I was at the time, but but I enjoyed it. I loved the music, I loved the comedy. It's very fun. And over the years, I've seen other different productions of it. I've seen the movie more times than I can count. And it's
we did a special reading of it and play book club.
We did. And there are things that I do, maybe I'm a little jaded, and I do, having spent so much time with it, there's things that I do criticize it, just like a weird uncle in this way. But overall, it comes from a place of fondness, and, just being a Jewish theater artist, playwright, I do find that it hangs over me in a way much like various other things do, like, I don't know, to the same extent that you could say something like the novels of Philip Roth do, or the playwriting of Arnold
Sure.
Wesker, just these kind of like grand specters that haunt my
Or it can
tormented
hang
Jewish
over
psyche.
you like an actual fiddler on the roof.
Yes, in a tenuous balance indeed. How about you? What's your relationship to Fiddler?
Well, I mean, this is one of my favorite musicals. It was our opening episode to season 2 on my other podcast before the downbeat, because it's one of those ones I knew we were going to do early on. It's one of my all-time favorite musicals. I came to it through the movie. My parents rented it when it was like on its 30th or 25th anniversary at the time, and when it was the 2 VHS box set from the local video store, and we watched that. I saw it in Toronto. It was supposed to be Topol in his farewell tour as Tevye at the age of 73. Hence why we bought our tickets for a Mervis show. There were seven of us who were going to go see it, including my grandfather, who's seen Fiddler numerous times. It's his favorite musical. And right before he got to Toronto, on one of his last shows in Buffalo, Topo blew at his shoulder and had to end his run early. So instead of getting the wonderful Topol, I instead got to sit through 3 hours of Harvey Fierstein.
I like Harvey Fierstein.
I do too.
He's not necessarily Topol, but I'm sure he would admit that himself. But like,
he absolutely admits it himself in the book about the making of Fiddler. They have an interview with him in there. But I will say, as much as I like Harvey Fierstein in certain roles, Tevye is not one that I was very fond of. This is a very much heavy bass singing performance, and having to listen to "If I Were a Rich Man,"
yeah, yeah, fair enough. And Harvey, if you're watching Harvey, apologies. Like, we like you overall.
I mean, like, he's wonderful as Edna Turnblad in Hairspray. I think his dialogue scenes, like I think his best scene of that whole show was "Do You Love Me?" Because he didn't have to sing. He was literally just singing it, and that's where he did his best. In that, my mother was not impressed. She didn't know who Fierstein was. So when my dad and I tried to explain to her who she was, I don't think she ever realized just the voice he has, which is very distinct. And actually, he does say because he did it on Broadway, he took over from Alfred Molina. Alfred Molina, when Alfred Molina did it on Broadway, and he actually requested to audition for the role because he realized just his voice is very distinct, and he's like, before I actually do this part, let me audition for you and let me see if you like it. And they did like it. And I mean, he did it with Rosie O'Donnell on Broadway.
Nice.
As Golda. So I mean, like, so I can see why they brought him in as a last minute replacement for Topol, because like they needed somebody who could.
Yeah, and he was a welcome presence in this documentary as someone who's like clearly informed on the play, knows the character inside and out.
Very well read.
Yeah, I appreciated his perspectives on it. Like, and you know, there's so many other actors that I would have loved to see kind of interviewed in this. Like Alfred Molina would have been nice if we got an interview from him. He wasn't. And has Mandy Patinkin ever played Tevye? I feel like in my head he has.
So he played it once in college, and it was right before his dad died.
Oh.
So I've always wanted him to do it again. They announced recently that they're going to be trying to do a remake of Fiddler. And my first thought was, you have to get Mandy Patinkin as Tevye. He's like the guy for it, even though he's like 70 years old. He could still, color up his beard, he's okay. He's still got it. But I've always thought Mandy Patinkin would be a fantastic Tevye.
Yeah, I just always had it in my head that he must have done it at some point. But
he did it once, like, because it happened right around the time his dad died of cancer. And it was I think it was either the last or one of the last performances he ever saw Mandy Patinkin do. Mandy Patinkin's always been very protective of never kind of going back to that part. He said in interviews, because other people have asked him, like, would you come back and do Tevye?
It seems like such a no-brainer for him to play.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Like I love Mandy Patinkin. I've seen him twice in concert. He is one of my favorite performers of all time. And I mean, even his concerts, I wish he would do some Fiddler. He actually does Yiddish songs in his most recent tour. He did a Yiddish number where at the end of the show he had great black and white footage of the Jewish people immigrating on the boats, and then that was juxtaposed with the recent migrant migrants that are trying to cross the border.
Which was also brought up in this documentary.
It was, and he was singing a Yiddish prayer song over the footage, and it was a beautiful finale. It brought me to tears. It was stunning.
Yeah.
And once again, I didn't know what the words he was saying. I mean, but you get the message and you get the point of what he's going for, and he's just a fantastic performer. Like, I would love to see him do the show in Yiddish. I think he'd be one of those actors that you could bring on. Everybody would completely understand what he's saying and what he's talking about. But yeah, no, he's a fantastic. Also, I think Jason Alexander would be another really
he would be
good,
like a funnier one. Like, I have a hard time picturing him hitting those like serious moments. Like, well, I guess Zero Mostel probably kind of was similar back in the day before Topol created the new
more
form.
sticky. Like if you read the book, that's part that gets referenced in this documentary. They talk about how Zero Mostel during If I Were a Rich Man, there's the joke that he would put his hand in, he would go into an open tin of milk and splash him. Well, that joke just kept getting bigger and bigger as the run went on. So he was a little more sticky.
Yeah, like, and I love Zero Mostel. Like, I don't have like a problem with.
He's very
like,
funny. Yeah,
yeah.
I watch him in those interviews. He does.
And like, go ahead.
Oh no! I'm saying you can see his comedy in that one interview he does where he's singing "If I Were a Rich Man" in the non-Jewish interview where he goes, "We'll do it my way," and then right away Zero Mostel's joke is, "If I were a rich
yes,
man."
right, with Dick Cavett, like,
yes, yeah, right. That shows how
yeah, so
is.
Yeah, like I picture like Jason Alexander would be closer to Zero Mostel, whereas someone like Mandy Patinkin would be much closer to Topol, and I think there is probably room for both.
Oh yeah, well, once again, they just talk about it in the documentary how there's two different Topols we get now. We get like kind of like the more modern Israel. They could call it like almost like an Israeli.
Well, yeah, because Topol is like Israeli, and he was representing this kind of like gruff new tough Jew that like the Israeli military conquests were kind of putting into the media at the time.
Exactly. Like that line of "This is still my home, get off my land." There are two different ways of reading that line, and they explain in the documentary of one is a more aggressive of the why, and the New York Jewish is more why.
Yeah.
Right, so it'd be very. But I have watched other movies with Jason Alexander where he does play serious. He's done some Fiddler on Broadway, but I do think he could, if you direct him right, he can actually do a really good, grounded Tevye. He has to be reined in and really kind of honed. And I think that's the trick with any bit of big characters like this. Like you can really take Tevye to a really extreme. Almost comedical spot that's really sticky and kind of over the top, kind of but then you also can make him too reserved and too serious. I mean, what's great about the character, and they describe this in the documentary, is Topol is a mixed bag. There are moments when he needs to be sticky and a bit broader, and then there are moments where he needs to be deadly serious and scary almost.
We've gone on some tangents about dream casting the role of Tevye, but let's actually start reviewing this documentary.
Yes, exactly. So Ryan, as the newcomer to this documentary, what are your initial thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think it's a very solid piece of like documentary filmmaking. It's like not showy at all. It's just kind of straightforward. We sat down with all these people who have something to say about Fiddler, whether it's because they were in a cast of it or they have written some authoritative like book length oral history on it, or they're just people like Stephen Sondheim and Lin-Manuel Miranda, who just are obviously very big in musical theater and have a lot of memories and relationship to it, even if they were never specifically affiliated with it themselves.
Lin-Manuel Miranda, who did it at his wedding.
Well, like I thought that was such an interesting scene where he and his like father-in-law of like an hour sing L'chaim together with the whole wedding party getting in on it, and as a surprise for his new wife. And Lin said something funny in like the interview segment where he's like, it's the only song in the entire musical theater canon that's sung between a father-in-law and a son-in-law.
He's right. I couldn't think of any others.
He's right, but or at least I can't think of any others. But what's kind of strange about it is it's of a failed engagement. Like,
true,
Seidel doesn't marry a laser wolf. Like, so I'm like, is this a bad omen that you're singing this to your new wife? Like, but
I think. I think you take that song out of context of the show,
as they certainly did.
Yes, then it's like it's okay, because like they even cast Lin-Manuel Miranda's dad as kind of the Russian constable that does the
Yeah.
Ostravoya, heaven bless you, like the kind of
Yeah.
tenory part. They gave that to his dad because his dad wanted to be part of it. So, and I mean, it's great. I mean, if you go on YouTube and watch the whole thing,
Yeah.
it's fantastic. Like, I'm almost like, I want to do that at my wedding now.
Well, now it's just hacky because he did it
Yes,
first.
I know. I gotta find something else.
Yeah.
Mind you, mind you, the fact that he's right, there isn't much father-in-law, son-in-law, or even father-son songs about marriage and weddings. It's like a missing part of the canon. We
Yeah.
got to up that a bit,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
Cool.
yeah, no, yeah.
So overall appraisal of the documentary, yeah, I think it's like full of just like great interviews, fun little historical tidbits and anecdotes. Like I said, it's not very showy. One thing I did like that kind of was, I guess, one of the showier moments is a few scenes where we had like animation in the style of Marc Chagall. Yeah, like the painting you have behind you, and they talked about how Chagall's paintings very much inspired the inception of the musical, and even so much as the title "Fiddler on the Roof" came from looking at a very specific Chagall painting, and I guess has no referent in the actual original Sholem Aleichem stories.
Yep.
But yeah, and so I do want to shout out. I wrote down the animator's name, Tess Martin, who did like all this interesting work to just create these Chagall-esque paintings and make them move. And it wasn't like used very much throughout. There was like one key scene when they were talking about rewrites in response to bad early reviews, and they were all meeting at a bar together, and Jerome Robbins says like, we're gonna overhaul the whole thing, 10 edits a day. I forgot the exact quote. And then it came up again later, like in another kind of key moment. Or it came up in a few times. The painting.
It comes up several times. There's only one moment where I wasn't a big fan of the animation.
Okay, what was that?
It was during the when they're talking about the Havala song / ballet sequence, because Danny Bernstein, who they're taking a lot of the Broadway clips from, he's giving such a beautiful performance on that cart, and I'm like, oh, don't cut away from him. Like, I don't mind it at the end when they kind of, because they cut to him and then they cut to the bird animation, then they cut back to him and they cut to the bird animation at the very end. I'm kind of like, just stick with him till the very end.
Right. And I don't
watching a bird pulling out a flower wasn't all that interesting. I was much more pulled to Danny Bernstein and his emotional force, because he talks about just how emotional that scene is and how polarizing it is. Because he talks about how during one performance he was doing of this song in this moment, an audience member clapped. For this moment,
she's dead to you. Good job,
right? Like, exactly.
Yeah.
It's my favorite scene of the whole musical, actually.
Yeah, it is definitely a heart wrenching one for sure.
It's it's heart wrenching, but the song and just how they did it. Because if you once again in the book, Miracle of Miracles, that talks about the making of it, there actually was a 20-minute Jerome Robbins ballet that was supposed to go in this part, but then they cut it for time, part of those 10 edits a day thing.
Well, and that's interesting because there was one little anecdote that they said in the documentary about how he didn't do like the standard kind of choreography, big dance numbers, that the bottle dance was the one exception to the rule, that dancing had to just be in dance appropriate contexts like weddings. So it's interesting that there was that whole big ballet number.
There was a big one that basically re-summarized the whole show. It's kind of like the Somewhere Ballet from West Side Story.
Right.
That same type of concept of it's kind of a rehash of what's going on, and that's why he cut it, because he's like, it's not overly important. And what that does is actually turns the focus back on Tevye in this moment, who is having an emotional breakdown because he knows, I can't come home and cry, because I have to be the strong masculine man who basically is holding the line of, she's dead to us. I can't show emotion. So the fact that, and the way the movie does it too, with Topol, where you can see him pushing the cart forward, then he has to stop and sit and just break. It's such great symbolism there of a man trying to move forward, but he can't. He has to stop, and it just breaks me every time, because it's such a horribly, hindsight 2020, horrible decision that we know we would never make. But I also go, if you look at it from Tevye's perspective of, he doesn't know he's leaving on Atevka. He sees he's got Seitel and Model and their family, and his two other daughters and his wife to think about too in this community. And he knows if he takes one daughter back who's broken away from the community, then they're all ostracized. They are now all basically fruit of the poisonous tree. and
So
they
yeah,
will
that's
all be
something that I like.
outcast for that.
I get that perspective, but I don't entirely agree, and not just because, well, I wouldn't make that decision, but like and I think it might just be a dramaturgical thing. I don't think that there's
Sure.
enough indication in the musical itself that they would be ostracized for it.
They
I
set
like
that up very
historically
in the
you can
musical.
understand that that would be the case, but I
Yeah.
don't see it in the play itself that
There are
ostracism would.
several scenes in the stage show that give that, like Tevye has the whole monologue of a bird may love a fish, but where do they make a home? And there's a whole lot more. There's like a whole bookstore scene where basically the Russians are coming in and antagonizing the community. And I mean, I think the whole fact that this community lives in fear of these Russians, who basically we see them. They program the wedding at
Yeah.
the end of Act One. So, and the fact that in their first scene is like, we spit on the Tsar, we spit on the Russians.
Yeah, but I think
it's
if
very much they are against that
but
outer world.
in my
that
mind,
change.
if I don't remember what Hava's suitor fellow Russian guy his
Vietka?
name is Vietka, yeah, like
Yeah.
I think if Tevye were to embrace that Vietka and let him into their community as someone who's basically renouncing the Tsar as opposed to having Hava be renounced by Tevye, I think there would be room for him in this community, and like he's obviously not the one committing pogroms against them. Like it's a very like I think there is
True.
like I don't know, but we don't get much characterization from him if this is something
No, he's kind of
willing
the
to
third
do.
suitor that kind of gets
Yeah.
left behind.
Yeah,
He gets
He's
the
no-
least amount of development.
he's no model, he's no Perchik.
No, exactly. He's the third one.
Yeah,
He doesn't even get a song. He gets a few scenes, and that's basically. And usually he's double cast as like Fiatka plus somebody else.
one
Or
of
I've
the
seen
villagers.
productions where like they have him in the bar scene, and he's the one that sings the big Strava, like the big
Right.
like thing there. But I mean, we see what's great about the live scene is that we see the potential of this community to come together with the Russians, but then it's broken asunder by the constable in the very next moment going, "A pogrom is coming."
yeah,
Tevye.
but
I want to warn you as a friend.
But I'm of the mind that, like, I don't know, maybe this is naive to think that they would feel this way in 18th century Russia, or sorry, 19th century Russia. It is, what year is this set? Or it's
It's like 1905.
19. Okay, so it's even early 20th century, but
It's
anyway.
it's after 1905 because that's when the first revolution
Okay,
happened.
right. Okay,
They
anyway,
blame the district. So it'll be like
early
1910.
20th century. But
Yeah,
yeah, so
1910.
but I'm of the mind that like you can separate Russian people from the Russian military who like
I think that's a very modern perspective. I think back then, because I mean, Jerome Robbins talks about it, which is this whole musical is built upon circles. There's the most internal circle that is Tevye and the family. Then it's the community circle that surrounds them. And then it's the outer circle, which is the Russians. And I mean, the song tradition makes very clear of, and then there are others in the village, much bigger, more important people. We don't bother them, and so far, they don't bother us. Like right away, it's very clear from the beginning of there is a delineation between these two groups, and they don't mix. I think the film did a better job of making the constable a more sympathetic character because they have like the inspector come into the town before the program, kind of going, "You need to do some more programming, like you need to do your job," and constable's kind of like, "Oh yes, absolutely, don't send anybody else, and I'll take care of it." And we don't get that scene in the stage show.
No,
Which is too bad because it does humanize the constable.
Yeah, and I like humanizing the constable because I don't think that I think there is something to the following orders. Not necessarily. He does seem to have a legitimate fondness, if not quite friendship, with Tevye. Like
they do have a friendship. They are very friendly. I mean, there's the whole great line of, "It's too bad, Tevye, you're a Jew. I like you." Right? So and there's
Tevye says, "I'm too bad you're not a Jew."
Yes, exactly. And there's the whole thing of, "You who have known us all your life will now throw us out in 3 days."
Yeah, so I like
Right?
humanizing that character. I think there is something to it, but at the end of the day, he's a man doing his job, and
yes, it's a horrible job.
A horrible job, yeah. But history's full of
Oh, absolutely, right. I mean, we can get into the whole World War II thing of
we don't need to talk about the banality of evil and this.
Yes, no, we're not. That's a whole different show.
So let's
this documentary though.
So yeah, I like the documentary overall. I think it's pretty straightforward. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like my favorite documentary ever, but I think it's solid. It's full of good anecdotes, and I'm happy. I'm glad I watched it, and certainly does put context. The kind of overall sort of appraisal, I think it's very clear in its theme of like what is this documentary trying to communicate? It's that this fiddler is this universal story that's appreciated in all cultures. It's not just American. It's not just Jewish. It's not just like Ashkenazi. It's not just Eastern European. Or it has this like resonance worldwide. And we've all heard stories about this before. The Japanese one is like a very famous one that they mentioned several times in this documentary. But I like how we expand the scope even more so to we see Dutch productions, we see the Thai production, we see the inner city middle school productions, and I like it's sort of kind of I guess beats the point over your head a little bit of just how like universal the story is, but like it's it's cohesive in its theming, and we can't blame it for that. So overall,
no, and exactly, and Jerome Robbins was very smart to make the writers go for that tactic, because he understood to make the story work, because audiences probably didn't have an appetite to go see a show about Jews in a shtetl going through a pogrom. But the minute you expand that into this larger thematic concept of tradition and the battle of tradition, New World versus Old World, that now opens the floodgates to now you can do it worldwide. And I mean, you and I have talked about this many times off camera of how do you do this production? Is it something that should be done strictly by Jewish actors, or is it this universal story that you can do with anybody on stage?
Yeah.
Is it a universal blind casting show? And I mean,
I've long been of the position that I feel like anyone can do this show. I know our friend Max Ackerman, especially on the Indecent panel, had some stronger opinions in the opposite direction, but he's not here to defend his points, so we might not need to. But
no, I mean, I think I agree with Max to a certain point of if you do have the ability to cast Jewish people in the roles, and this show is very specific, like it is time and place specific, that it should be done that way. I mean, obviously, if you're going to do it in Tokyo in an inner city middle school, you don't have access to that.
Well, but I would challenge that, because there are Jews that live in Japan, and you could they might be white, they might be Japanese. Like there's actually kind of a lot of interesting diversity in Jewish communities, and but I don't think just because, yes, we can find one Jew that, okay, well, let's get him in here to play Tevye in this otherwise all Japanese production. I think different contexts casted in different meanings, and I think it's okay to embrace this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why the show's been done every day since it's been opened in 1964. As they say at the end, it's the most widely produced.
And that's a fun fact. I don't know how you verify that every single day there hasn't been like a 1 day gap.
Well, I think it's just there would be a 1 day gap, because Mondays are usually dark days
exactly.
in theater, so it's not every day, but basically almost
overstating the claim a little bit. But this idea of universality, I think, is interesting. So a play I actually just have it sitting right here on my desk that this kind of makes me think about is this very famous Jewish play. It's The Diary of Anne Frank, as dramatized by Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett. And so I have it on my desk because it's partly one of the case studies for my dissertation.
Very good.
And there's a lot of when you read the kind of scholarly discourse on this play, there's a lot of discussion about the Americanization of Anne Frank's story through this play, and making it less Jewish, less German, less Dutch, less specific to its kind of European Jewry context, and putting it into something that Americans can relate to. And there's very famously, there was another playwright named Meyer Levin who had the rights to write his own version, and then the Frank family, Otto Frank, didn't like it, and he went to Goodrich and Hackett instead. And the kind of big, various people have strong opinions about whether or not the Meyer Levin version was and or would have been better. But it's, the big critique is that, well, these two Goyish playwrights, Goodrich and Hackett, this husband and wife duo, kind of turned it into something that the original diary wasn't, by kind of removing the Jewish elements. They have a Hanukkah scene in there, but it's not about the religious elements of Hanukkah. They turned it into a gift-giving holiday, just like Christmas, and to make it something that the Goyim audience that would probably see it on Broadway could relate to. And I don't necessarily have strong opinions on whether or not that's a bad thing or a good thing. I see both sides to this argument.
Yeah, I mean,
Meyer
yeah.
Levin kind of sounded like a bit of a, I don't know about crazy person is the right word, but very obsessive. He quite literally wrote a memoir about his experience and his lawsuit with Otto Frank that he titled Obsession.
Oh,
And so yeah, like he has this strange fixation to the idea of Anne Frank, the diary, what it represents,
mhm,
and I've never read his version
yeah,
of the play, so
mhm,
I don't know how good or
yeah,
it would even be.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, once again, I think for this, I think depending on how you cast it, it just highlights different things. I think when they did it as an all Yiddish production with an all Jewish cast, from what I've read, uh, doing like seems like the Sabbath prayer
Mhm.
has a very clear message and context to it that say if you did it in I don't know, South Africa with a
Sure.
South African company, I think the Sabbath prayer scene would have a different view of, okay, this is a tradition, this is a generalized like a generalized version of a prayer
Mhm.
versus doing it in Yiddish with a Jewish company. I think there's things that are lost and things that are gained depending on how you cast. Once again, as with any adaptation, any direction you do of a play or a musical, you choose to highlight certain aspects of a piece because you can't do it all. Like a director and a producer will come in like with a very particular way of how they want to see the show. I mean, that's why we do all these revivals. I mean, you look at the Sam Mendes revival versus the Yiddish production versus the Jerome Robbins original production. They all focused on very different elements of the
Yeah.
story while still keeping it under the realm of tradition. But I mean, like, there was a whole critique about Sam Mendes and the fact that he had the daughters during Matchmaker. They were bathing. They had a bath on stage, like obviously in undergarments, like
Yeah.
very appropriately dressed, but still, like it was very kind of like, oh, they're not just dancing with mops. This is a bit more of a modern, risque version of Fiddler on the Roof. But I mean, like you hear about how like Jerome Robbins' version had all the houses,
Mhm.
and he
Yeah.
was big on the symbolization of the circles. The circles were always a big thematic element to him. And yet you look at the Yiddish production and the way they designed it and the way they directed it, it was very much to highlight the language. Like they actually had, if I remember correctly from the pictures of this production, they had Yiddish text
Mhm.
written on like fabric around the space. Right. So it's very interesting. And once again, that's what makes this musical really great is that you can take it in
Yeah.
so many directions with so many different types of casts
And I
that,
think
yeah.
And I think, like, to kind of counterpose it to the Diary of Anne Frank example,
Yeah.
since I brought it up anyway, like,
Yeah.
I don't think kind of just if you
Mhm.
take the essential Fiddler of the Roof
Yeah.
unmoored from any specific production, I
Mhm.
don't think it's really Americanizing the story the same way
Mhm.
that Goodrich and Hackett
Yes.
Americanized Anne Frank's story.
Yeah.
Like, it's still very much in the shtetl, in the culture. It
Mhm.
like it helps that it was like a mostly or all Jewish creative team, like except
Right.
for Hal Prince, but
Yes, yeah.
but
But
who
mind you,
would
Hal Prince was
yeah.
smart because he said, "I don't understand this, ergo, I will not direct it, but I will produce it."
Yeah.
Because he realized I don't have the right sensibility for this, and I applaud him for that because Hal Prince was coming off a big directing high with oh, what is it called? Is it The Girlfriend
I
or
don't
The
know.
Boyfriend? Something like that. Either way, it was a big rom-commy musical. He was coming off the high of. So he was in high demand. He was producing, he was directing, and he could have easily said, "Yes, I will direct it." Now he didn't because he understood we need somebody else's sensibility to create this piece.
Mhm.
But he was smart enough to know I'll produce it and I'll get money off it.
Mhm.
So he was smart enough to know that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, I don't remember what got us on this tangent, but did you have
Oh,
any kind of last
it
thoughts
was
of that overall appraisal?
um no, I mean, as I said, it's a documentary that brought up a lot of unique thoughts, things I hadn't even thought about. Like when Harvey Fierstein talks about the fact that Tevye never talks to God after the Havala
Yeah.
ballet, and I was like, I never noticed that, but that now gave me a whole new appreciation for how, if I were to direct this show, or if I ever one day ever got a chance to play Tevye, how you play that scene, which is you almost have to do that final soliloquy he does between God and himself, where he's the if I bend that far, I'll break. Like it's I guess one of those things of like it's almost like a breakup scene that he's doing where he's like, Yeah, I'll give this one to you because I can't bend that far. But I'm really freaking pissed at you for this because you made me choose between my daughter and you and my faith. And that's something I never wanted to do. Because he always finds a way to get around or justify himself to his friend with his other two daughters, but this time he can't. And it's once again, it's one of the hardest, most beautifully written scenes of the piece. And the fact that Harvey Fierstein pointed that fact out that he never speaks to God again, I was like, huh, I never caught that, but it explains why he's so angry at the end. Because he's just in pain. After that scene, till the very end when he walks off the stage, he is a man who is, every step he takes is just another step in a painful direction. Like he's a broken man basically when he leaves the stage at the end of this piece. But then there's hope at the end because he takes the fiddler with him.
He takes the fiddler with him, and he does indirectly say goodbye to Hava.
Yes.
So like he doesn't completely abandon her. Like
exactly.
Well, she's still dead to him, but like
yes.
at least.
But he'll talk to the dead.
God be with you. Yeah.
Yes,
well,
exactly.
and that's the thing that I never understood, not just about this musical, but about the very Jewish. He's dead to me, my son or my daughter. Like it's the whole, the line in Fiddler is Hava is dead to us. We will forget her. And like that's not how death works. You don't just forget your loved ones when they die. That's the opposite of how we react to the dead. So like there's something very insincere about this very guilt trippy Jewishy approach to disappointing relatives.
I mean that's the whole thing in any organized religion. This whole concept, I think it's called the Shiva. I think it's what they call it in the documentary. Well, where basically they exile you from the community.
It's not quite what a Shiva is, but it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's that type of, because Zero Mostel, he like they found out in the documentary that he had experienced this situation that Hava goes through. And I mean, it's something that happens in every organized religion, right? Anybody who steps outside the community and goes somewhere else is ostracized. It happens with race. It happens with religion. Basically, if you go outside the community and go with the other, we will exile you because it's the unknown. It's a threat of the unknown, and it's an old, almost, I don't want to say caveman, but it's that old concept that we've been living with since the days of cavemen and clans and that type of thing. Like you go back into things like Shakespeare, right? I mean, exactly. I mean, we're moving away from that, but I mean, we still see that in this day and age where my son or daughter comes out. Ergo, now that child is no longer mine. You are not welcome in my family anymore. That is still happening today. It is still very much a tragic part.
But I do think there's something to be said for the fact that, especially with like, to take the like queer analogy that you've just brought up, and they actually also brought up in the documentary, like I think if we put it in that lens, it becomes very hard to sympathize with Tevye if we're thinking of it and I think that's maybe a newer dimension to it that in 1964 wouldn't have been brought on. But like, if you X-menify it, if you will, and make it about it's about LGBTQ, like anything now, it does become harder, like assuming you are like someone who is tolerant of queer identity, which I hope everyone listening is. If you're not, work on that, I hope. It's I think it becomes very hard to like feel sympathetic towards Tevye when he's basically just like that Republican father who denounces his daughter because she's gay. Like,
exactly. I mean, any father. I mean, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. That can happen to anybody. I mean, it can happen in any family, and that's the tragedy of it. And I think that's why it's even more important to have that scene of "And God be with you," because it shows the crack in Tevye's armor. There, and I think it's that open door of there's the potential in the sequel, maybe the sequel to Fiddler and Uncle Avram, the new sitcom musical.
I'd watch that as a sitcom. That sounds
right. I think you got some fun with that.
I'm sure Uncle Avram's a hoot.
Exactly. the kooky American uncle. But so I think this documentary is fantastic. Like, it brought so many perspectives and interesting elements. Like, I didn't know all about Sholem Aleichem. I knew his name. I knew that these were the stories that were based upon his work, but I didn't know his opinions on matchmakers and that whole aspect. And his stance on matchmakers now explains why he is so against Yenta in this musical. That he is really sticking it to Yenta with these daughters. And yeah, I love the close reading they did on a lot of the songs and just the impact of the songs, like the fact that I think it's Jerry Bach or Sheldon Harnick, one of the two of them, talks about how like the Do You Love Me scene is almost a wish fulfillment song for them, about how they wish their parents would have been. I think that's beautiful. Like yeah, Do You Love Me is my other favorite moment of the show besides the Hava ballet and song sequences. Do You Love Me? I think that's a beautiful song that is it just warms my heart every time I get to that point on the show. I'm just like, oh, like Tevye knows how to work Golda when he wants it, when he wants to. Like he knows how to kind of get her go on his side, which is great. It shows this marriage of the odd couple where at one point they're bickering and fighting, and then another moment they're loving one another. And then deep down they do have a love for another, like even if they don't always agree on topics. Like it's a really beautiful couple.
I have very mixed feelings about the song Do You Love Me, because I think it is just like a beautiful, sweet moment in the play. But at the same time, I'm also like, oh, this is kind of like, it's trying to kind of hammer home the point that yes, our children are being progressive and breaking out and making us question whether or not the system works, but well, we love each other, so I guess it does kind of work, the old system. And it seems to be backpedaling on what I think is interesting about the more kind of revolutionary themes that are being put forward in the daughter plot lines.
Yeah, I think I think the Do You Love Me song, I think it's a sweet moment, but I also think it's a moment for Golda and Tevye to reflect and go, wait a minute, like we lucked out. I mean, we know Frumasera and Lazar Wolf did not have good marriage. And even after she's dead, she's still haunting freaking Lazar Wolf and his
well, is she really, or is that just something
exactly. But it's the whole thing of we keep bringing her up and she's not thought of as nice. But it's the whole thing there. But it's like the fact that like, oh, we actually did find love. We actually are just like our revolutionary children, that they're marrying for love. They are going with their partner. I mean, yes, we were forced to it down the aisle, but
they found it along the way. Yeah,
and the
part about the song that really breaks my heart is the fact that they even need to ask, and I think that's the indication that there's something wrong with the old system.
Well, exactly. There's something wrong with the old system, and I think it's more just these are people who literally, she says, I cook the meals, I clean the house, you're doing your cow thing. Like we are like they were living like back then on the show, you were living hand to mouth basically. They never had time to stop and ask that question. So when you have to stop and think, it's like, oh, wait a minute. 25 years on, what are we? And I mean, every empty nester parent who, once the children are moved out, have to ask each other that question.
Was it just the kids that were keeping us together this whole time?
Right? Yeah. Exactly. Right. So is there common ground? Is there common love? And I think that's something every couple at some point will ask themselves, because when you're in that 18-year rat race with the kids, just trying to get them to piano lessons, to dance lessons, to get them ready for college and university, or whatever their next post-secondary education step is, and you stop and go, oh, where are we at?
Right.
And, it's just and once again, as I said, it's an older couple song.
And this and it's very nice. I like it a lot. For all my misgivings, it's still a very beautiful song.
It is a beautiful song. I will sing that at my 25th wedding anniversary.
Go for it.
to my wife.
And then she answers like, "Oh wait, do I love him?" I'm like, "Oh no, 25 years."
So I mean, you said you had thoughts on the song When Messiah Comes.
Okay.
So what do you think of the song? Because they bring up the fact that it was a bit of a bone of contention. It was well liked by the cast, but the audiences were not taken to it.
Yeah, so I think for those who haven't watched the documentary and maybe have never even heard of this, it was kind of right at the sort of basically the climax, or at least kind of denouement, depending on where you sort of place the climax in your own Freytag pyramid reading of this play. But
it comes after they've been given the edict to get out.
They begin and was replaced with Anatevka, which we kind of all now know to be this like somber closing number.
Yes. Yeah,
but
but it came from a faster upbeat song. The Anatevka is actually a chorus from a letter writing song to Uncle Avram.
Mhm.
And actually they just slowed the tempo down and took the chorus, and that's what they used for Anatevka.
Mhm.
But yeah, when Messiah comes, go for it,
So
Brian. Give it
so
to
like
us.
okay, so well, first of all, I think before even getting into just like tonally, does it make
Yeah.
sense to have a comedy song here?
Mhm.
I I think something about the idea of building a song around the idea of when the Messiah comes,
Mhm.
mm, I think it would impede this universality that the
Yes.
whole documentary is constructed around, and it would
Yep.
make it is a very Jewish idea of kind of,
Correct.
and like there is a lot of Jewish stuff in the play certainly, but
Yeah.
I think this one might kind of teeter it too much into that kind of Meyer
Correct.
Levin as opposed to Goodrich and Hackett kind
Yes.
of, if we want to go back to the Anne Frank
Yes. Yeah.
metaphor or
Exactly.
comparison,
Mhm.
that because like Judaism quite literally, the branch off point between Judaism and Christianity is
Yeah.
Christians think the Messiah did come and his name was Jesus, and Jews think that guy, Messiah, he's still going to come someday.
Yep.
So I think kind of anchoring, even if it is a comedy song, anchoring it in this very like Jewish theological
Mhm.
idea that it's not just about the plight of displaced people anywhere, and it could be anyone. It's specifically theologically rooting it in this kind of
Yep.
culture and tradition. And I think that maybe, especially at such a pivotal climactic moment, might have lost a lot. I don't know if we could have had like all of our Japanese and Thai and Dutch
Mhm.
productions necessarily, and
Yes.
if the Temptations would be singing songs from it, like,
Mhm.
but yeah, so which was a great moment in this
It
documentary.
is.
But yeah, so that's kind of was sort of my first thought of just
Mhm.
even building a song around the idea of the Messiah or the
Mhm.
Messianic Judaism traditions, like. Um,
Mhm.
but then to kind of just get to the bigger point of like it's such a kind of like upbeat kind of, it feels more at home and funny thing happened at the way to the forum than it does in like,
Yes.
yeah, it really feels like a
Yeah.
comedy tonight type song. um yeah, does it
Mhm.
work in this moment? And I completely agree with the decision
Mhm.
to cut it and go with Anatevka, which really just does hit like
Yes.
gut punch you, and like
Mhm.
obviously
Yeah.
that's the one we have, and that like it
Mhm.
really works very well, and I love it
Yeah.
a lot.
Mhm.
But I'm skeptical of the idea that a comedy song couldn't work
I
in.
think well, 'cause I read up on the song
Mhm. And
because I had to
they
research it
recite it
for.
in the documentary too.
They
Yeah.
do. I mean, they have a verse. I mean, if you buy the Yiddish album of Fiddler,
Okay.
they actually include all the cut songs from the musical, and there's quite a few. They have the original opening song that we hear briefly in the documentary of "There's noodles to make" and da 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 da, and you hear
Mhm.
that melodic line that becomes tradition, the
Right.
mother's line in tradition. But anyway, with Messiah Comes, originally it was supposed to be sung by the rabbi, and I think the original direction of it was this is the rabbi giving a pep talk, basically. It's
Yeah.
that moment of, hey guys, I know it's bad. Don't worry, we'll be okay. It's almost like that grandfatherly, because the song is spurned on by when Tevye says to the rabbi, Rabbi, if the
Yeah.
Messiah were to come, now would be a time.
Yeah.
And in the stage show now, the line is, we always have to search for him somewhere else.
Mhm.
But in the original
It
stage
would have
show,
transitioned into this
into the
upbeat,
song,
peppy song about
I,
which.
I don't think it would be peppy. I think it'd just be more of a sore, almost like a put on a brave face, like almost like a mix of when Messiah comes. Like it's almost like that
Right, the
trepidatious,
sun will
like
come out tomorrow.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly, and
whereas
it also has a bit of that Yiddish humor that we
mhm,
hear in that song too, where it's like that's. But once again, I don't think it works because of the fact that Anatevka is a communal song, and the
mhm,
show is all about community and
right,
tradition. So it's important to get the group voice in this moment of what are they really losing, and it's
right.
the community. It's the breaking of the circles,
I would
right?
argue that
That's
the
what.
rabbi could be a voice of the community, sort of like a
He
Greek chorus type
absolutely can be.
character, and
Yeah.
like, and it's funny that you kind of putting it in like this sort of pep talky tone. I like listening to it for the first time because I never even heard this song or knew about this
Mhm.
song before this.
Yeah.
I kind of, the image I had in my head wasn't like, okay, tough times pep talk. It
Mhm.
was end of life of Brian. Always look on the
Oh,
bright side of life, which which is like, honestly, like I love that. It's like one of my favorite like
It is a
endings of
great
any
song.
movie ever,
Yeah.
because like yeah, it's like so, and like it definitely fits the dark comedy tone
Yes.
of that movie that maybe
Yeah.
doesn't quite fit with Fiddler as much, or at
No,
least,
definitely not.
but like I think there is something to the idea of like, well, to take it back to ancient Greece, a trilogy of three tragedies would always end with a satyr play, and you would have,
Right.
the and like there's like we've lost this tradition because we always think now tragedy is the doom and gloom and kind of ending on the somber note.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if it was Laurence Olivier or John Gielgud, but at one point I think it was either in the 60s or 70s, one of those
Mhm.
two eminent British actors did a
Right.
production of, I think it was Oedipus, and
Mm.
it ended with him like, he's stabbing out his eyes, he's
Right.
bleeding, he's sobbing, it's the torment, he's going into exile.
Mhm.
Curtain goes down, and then curtain immediately goes up, and he's on stage with a big phallus doing a ridiculous song and dance. Same actor, like, and it was like kind of the audience at the time, at least in the reports that I've read of this, like it was so much more devastating to switch to that starkly than it would
Mm.
have been to just
Yeah.
end on, oh, poor Oedipus.
Right.
And so I think, yeah, there is, I'm not going to just across the board say there's no room for the comedy song in what
Mhm.
this should be a very sad moment.
Yeah.
I think overall, based on the poor reviews they said they got in the initial pre-Broadway run, and
It
what
was
a
a
master,
wise decision.
yeah, like we have a masterpiece with Anatevka as a brilliant song. It is a sort of very poignant moment at the end of the play. I'm happy that we have it, but part of me kind of thinks, so what could have been if this was
Yes.
the ending we had.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also just a wiser choice because, as you said, this would have been a very white
Mhm.
waspish
Mhm.
audience
Yeah.
who wouldn't get the subtlety and the humor of it when Messiah comes because they're so programmed and prone to go, oh, we're at a really sad moment. Wait a minute, why are we having this
Mhm.
song now? That it's like I don't want to say you have to spoon feed, but you almost have to do a bit of a meet the expectation of the moment of sad moment, ergo leads to sad song.
Mhm. Right. And it
So
works. Well,
it does work.
I'm
It
not
does
mad
work.
about it. Like,
Yeah. I
I
mean,
just
once
think
again,
it's
it's a
interesting.
brilliant finale, brilliantly tragic finale. And I mean, how can you not shed a tear? I mean, actually, speaking of this moment, so when I saw the documentary at Hot Docs, and when we got to this moment in the documentary, and they do the pan clip of them recording the film version of Anatevka, and they have the soundtrack playing, every single person in that audience started singing. The two
Mhm.
balcony, every single person, even I was mouthing the words. I knew the
Well,
words.
you were one of the people in that audience, so it
I
makes sense.
was. I was, but it was literally a packed house and everybody started singing the song. Everybody understood that song. And it was this eerie community moment of we hadn't sung any other song as a group, but this was the one song that everybody started quietly singing along to. And it was like, yeah, this is the right choice for this moment of the show. It's the powerful community moment of it is Onatevka is a place.
Yeah.
But it's what you take away from that place that will carry you forward
Mhm.
in this tough moment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. This kind of segues partly in a
Ooh,
kind of oblique way to
segue way, Ryan.
another question I think you wanted to discuss in here.
Sure.
And the comparison might, or the relation might not be obvious initially, but it'll feed into my answer to it.
Okay.
So you wanted to talk about, is this play about Tevye or is it about his daughters?
Yes, yeah, because the documentary kind of suggests at certain points that this musical is more about the daughters and their journey to modernization than it is to Tevye and his story. The story not kind of goes back and forth on whose story. They never actually give a definitive answer
No,
themselves
and
on who they think
it
it
doesn't
is.
like take up a lot of time in the documentary. It's not like this is, if you take one thing from this documentary, it's this. This is the daughters' story. But
Yeah.
there is like this interesting close reading of the song Matchmaker, Matchmaker,
Mhm.
where it is, you can map out like a whole 3 act structure just in this one song, and it is this call to action that does, it is in that moment that the younger two of the three elder daughters, that's confusing as a sentence, but that the younger two daughters come to the realization that, okay, we are gonna follow in the path that Seidel is gonna begin, that because they are very content following the matchmaker path at the beginning when they're singing about matchmaker, matchmaker, yay, it's all exciting. And they end the song realizing that, okay, no, we don't want this. what
Yes.
are the three of us going to do about it? And that does set the rest of the plot into motion, starting with Seidel and Model, and then goes daughter to daughter to daughter, and then we never find out what happens with the younger two.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, like, for me, I always go, this is Tevia's story. He starts the show, he ends the show. This is Tevia's story about the modernization of himself and his family. And I mean, as you said, after each daughter kind of gets the suitor and their story falls off. Like, there's a bit of, once again, in the book that I read about Fiddler on the Roof, they talk about how there's a cut song from Model and Seidel in Act 2 that was all about this miracle sewing machine that Model gets.
Right. Which there's definitely there's the scene with the sewing machine,
but there's a whole song.
Yeah.
There's a whole song about the marvelous sewing machine. And they had to cut it. And the actors went to Jerome Robbins and went, Jerry, why are we cutting this? And he goes, kids, once you're married, the story isn't about you anymore. We're moving on.
And like,
you're not the central couple.
And like, I would agree with that for the most part. I think a song about a sewing machine is no great loss, like, just in general. Like, but
once again, it was a continuation of the Model and Seidel story. Like, we kind of hear a bit about what they're up to. We hear about, like, they're hungry like squirrels. They had a kid. Like, some time has passed. They're happily living together. But it's like, other than that, we see them briefly throughout, but in Act 2. But really, Act 1 is their story and their story about their marriage, and then Act 2 is kind of the other two daughters. And even then, Huddle is wrapped up very quickly. Like, she gets the opening of Act 2 with the with Perchik's song "Now I Have Everything," and she has her. And it's like, oh, I'm going away. Oh,
yeah. Quick, get her off to Siberia quickly. This isn't about you.
And then Hava is like doing a whole bunch of stuff unseen in Act 2, where it's all of a sudden like, I want to marry Fieka, Papa. We've been having all these secret dates off stage, you know.
Yeah.
It's bird and fish, marriage, end.
So, like, I would agree that, like, individually, it's not about any of the daughter characters. I think there is the compelling argument that the daughters collectively make up, like, an interesting central presence throughout, like, because it is the story of just one daughter to one daughter. But at the end of the day, it's less about the daughters themselves. They take the action that sets the plot into motion, but the play is really about Tevia's reaction to that action. And the way that he processes it, bends but doesn't break, or then does break at the end. But like, so
But that's his journey, right? Because at the very end, he does slightly break with the God be with you.
Well, yeah, but like, and Matchmaker, after Matchmaker, the daughters' journey is done. They
don't have another song.
Well, and not even about not having another song, but they've made their decision by the end of that song, and then it's just about doing the steps to make that happen. Right. But Tevye goes on a journey throughout the entire piece, so it is very much. So, the thing I said, kind of like what was kind of transitioning us from the previous question into this one, is part of me wanted to be a dick and answer this question. No, it's neither of their story. Anna Tevka is the protagonist of Fiddler.
I think you actually make a very good argument.
No, the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, no, wait, that's not true. And I'd be a dick to say it, because this is not The Wire. This is like, you know, in The Wire, Baltimore is the protagonist of that story. And then in Treme, New Orleans is the protagonist, because that's what David Simon does best. But but at the end of the day, while the community is very important in the piece, just like the daughters are very important, it's not really the story of the community. Like The Wire, to just keep up with this example, can be a story about Baltimore more so than it is a story about Jimmy McNulty or Stringer Bell or anyone, because it's showing so many different stories going on in this town, so that the town itself takes on the central role as being the one connecting thread between them all. But we don't have any other character that even comes close to Tevye in terms of presence, arc, development. So the community is central, but I would not be a dick and say that it is the central character of the piece. It is the setting, and it is a very interesting textured setting.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, Anna Tevka is very much kind of like the unspoken character of the piece. Like, Anna Tevka, the town does have a presence. It has a beat to it. And the fact that, like, at the end it does die, basically, when these people leave.
And there's the interesting
it's kind of almost like New York and Spider-Man. Like,
Sure.
Like New York is very much a character within the Spider-Man
It's a
universe.
character, but it's not the protagonist.
Yes,
right?
no,
That's
definitely is not the protagonist.
And I think the interesting thing that they said in this documentary is how Jerome Robbins insisted that every villager have a proper name, that none of them were just Villager 1, Villager 2, and that does kind of, it creates a bunch of more little characters, but the effect of that is that it does turn the community into a character in its own right.
It does. I mean, like I just said, Jerome Robbins, he named every ensemble character and gave them a profession. You know, it wasn't just,
even if it doesn't matter to the plot.
It doesn't. Yeah. I mean, like you and I both know when we were casting and doing our reading in our play book club we do, like the fact that there are these one-liner individual solo characters that show up for like one scene and get one line.
There's the innkeeper, there's the candlestick maker, there's like most of them, their profession does not factor in, aside for like Laser Wolf as the butcher and the rabbi as the rabbi. Like none of their professions matter even a little bit.
No, exactly. And I mean, I think that's and they talk about this, the fact that Jerome Robbins refused to stage the opening scene till like the very end of rehearsals. And I'm like, I'm glad he did, because he gave the whole rehearsal process to build this community. So by the time he got to staging that song, the community was set. He just had to come in and go, move here, move there. You know your relationships to one another. We've built this up already, and I mean, I think that's the joy of this show, is that there is such a strong community element. That once again, it's why the show can be so versatile in so many different groups and cultures, because tradition community is a universal concept for people.
Yeah, and I think there's something to he needed to stew on it for a while in order to like flesh all out. But when I heard that like kind of little anecdote, it kind of made me think about perhaps the tyrannical nature of someone like Jerome Robbins, and this documentary did not shy away from that topic.
No,
if you want to pivot into that for a moment.
I was about to say, let's pivot into that, because so basically this documentary certainly does not shy away from the I'll go for it. I'll say it. Abusive behavior Jerome Robbins exhibited, and it's the same thing that happened in West Side Story as well, where you would make dancers' feet bleed. When he was filming West Side Story, there was an actor with over 100-degree fever, and he fainted while filming the song "Cool," but they kept going because he drilled it into them. And I mean, like, ultimately, I think my question to you, Ryan, is: does the ultimate positive end result of a really good piece ever justify the truly abusive behavior? Like we hear in this about how he basically was berating the actor who plays Hava for that one line of "We'll write to you in America," and him making her do that line over and over because she wasn't getting what he was wanting. And
so right off the bat, I'll say my answer to this question is no. Like I, as someone who loves and values art and loves great art and loves Fiddler and loves the finished product we got, like, it's called the humanities for a reason, because where you got to have the humanity to do it. And Jerome Robbins, great artist, but no amount of like quote genius or artistry can justify being an asshole, let alone an abuser to your collaborators. And they're not your subordinates, they are your collaborators. And I don't know, to me it's like, it doesn't sound as extreme as like stories you hear about Stanley Kubrick berating Shelley Duvall and on the set of The Shining,
where she loses her hair because she's so stressed.
So there's obviously more extreme examples, but the fact that this maybe is to a lesser degree doesn't excuse it any less. But the thing that's just my answer. I don't think any, art cannot come at the cost of human well-being, of, your collaborators. I don't believe in, I do believe that there's something to the idea of auteurism, but I don't believe that it excuses any kind of like misbehavior, and that I think you should come from a place of respect for your colleagues and collaborators and care for their well-being, because if, it's not a good look. It's not good behavior. But the thing that I kind of want to talk about, like in relation to this, is the way, and this maybe more of just like a cinematic analysis here, but the way that this interlude is framed in the documentary, because it's bookended by two, it's not an undercurrent that kind of like shoots through the entire piece. It's just like a segment in the middle, and it's bookended by two very interesting like lines, and one of them was I believe it was Jerry Bach speaking it, but he was quoting Boris Aronson, who was the designer for the original production. And he said that after they watched the bottle dance for the first time,
Right.
Boris turned to him and said, "A guy who can do that kind of work, you have to forgive him anything." End quote. And this was our transition into the, okay, let's talk about some of the shadier side of Jerome Robbins's directing.
Mhm.
And then we kind of like start unpacking the various things. And yeah, Boris Aronson's son, who was one of the interviewees in this, he even said during the segment that my father hated working for Jerry, but also deeply admired Jerry. And like, and then, like, I talk about this book ending, this segment ended very kind of, in my mind, abruptly after we kind of lay out the sins of Jerome Robinson. Sorry, Robbins. It ended with Stephen Sondheim, and I quote, because I wrote it down verbatim:
Love it.
"I would work with him anytime. The end product is worth it." End quote. And then we move on. And then we cut to Zero Mostel on Dick Cavett. And then we still talk about Jerome Robbins even more so when we talk about animosity between Zero and Jerome.
Yeah.
About especially like, the HUAC hearings. And I think that kind of is almost like the death knell. And well, yeah, maybe he was a dick to work with, but he was going through a lot. He was gay. He was persecuted by McCarthy.
Yeah.
Like,
he was a very complex person.
Yeah, but I think this book ending, like cinematically, or like the editing and the framing of this documentary is interesting. That we start with the Boris Aronson quote of "you have to forgive him anything." Yeah. Then we lay out the sins, and then we end with Stephen Sondheim on "the end product is worth it." Yeah. And as I've made clear, sorry, Mr. Sondheim, I cannot agree with you on that. As much as I love that end product, I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah. For me, I go. The end product is beautiful. You look at Fiddler on the Roof, West Side Story, so many works he did that are iconic. That bottle dance is incredible. And the things he gets angry about, there's the one actor who plays, was the original Mottle. And he talks about how he became complacent and kind of stagnant in the role, and Jerome Robbins berates him and says, "I felt sorry for that girl marrying you." It's horrible to say, but I think that note, and I think ultimately it comes down to delivery, because you can be a tough director. I've had tough directors. My dad's had tough hockey coaches who he's learned a lot from, but I think it's in the delivery and the way you communicate your notes and how you treat your people, because you can still be hard. If you have a vision and somebody is not getting it, and Jerome Robbins was someone who was precise and was a perfectionist himself, that he drove himself to these levels. And we know, and people who are like that do have high expectations for people around them. But there also is, as you said, the common decency and respect. So I think for me, I go, do I agree with Sondheim that yes, it's tough, but I also go, I think somebody needs to talk. Like if Jerome Robbins is still alive, I go, listen, I get what you're going for, but your communication method is not working. But yelling and berating at your Hava actress because she's not saying a line right is not getting your end result. The goal here is to ultimately be like, you're not getting it, basically saying like, you're going at it the wrong way. This is what I'm looking for. Like a much more gracious way of directing that moment. Like, yes, be hard, and yes, get what you want, but communicate better. And I don't think Jerome Robbins was an effective communicator. I think he was quite, from what all the things I read about him. And Jason Alexander says the same thing when he was in the rehearsal room with Jerome Robbins when he was older. He goes, he is a perfectionist. He was someone who made me rewrite that bloody book for that show about him multiple times. We'd have an idea, I'd write a concept out, and then he'd throw it all out on me because he didn't like it. Like, this was someone who just was meticulous, and that's why you watch those iconic dances. And they are so spectacular because he was so specific. And that's why when you do these shows, his name and title of choreography is still there and it's still part of the rights package, because you have to do it this way unless if you're going to use any of his choreography. And so I think from there I go, I understand him and I understand his work, but I also go, I don't think he was an effective communicator, and that's where I have a problem. Yeah. I don't mind his strictness and his drive to get the image he wants. I don't like the way he went about it.
I
if that makes any sense. I don't agree
does.
with his abusive behavior, but I agree that sometimes you have to be a bit of a tough coach, tough director to get your concept across.
Like, I don't disagree with that, and you certainly are making sense in your point.
Oh, good.
I just don't know if
Mhm.
there's a clear line between those two things. And I think if we condone the like toughness, the strictness,
Mhm.
it's too easy, especially in a culture that does romanticize genius artists,
Right.
that like it's too easy to cross that line and
Right.
for the adoring fans to prohibit it because it created something great in the end.
Right.
And like, I don't know, like I also just I am quite skeptical of anyone who thinks of themselves as enough of a genius that
Right.
they know what's best and none of my collaborators possibly can, so I need to
Right.
be the tough. Like, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying Jerome Robbins wasn't a genius, he made brilliant work, like,
He
but
he was very influential. Like
but
he
but
paved the
I
way for many others.
but I don't trust that kind of self-confidence and audacity to think of himself in this way and
Yeah.
to
Oh,
know that only
absolutely.
he
Yeah.
could. Like,
Mhm.
maybe the actress playing Hava, like, was trying something different in her line, and maybe it's not
Mhm.
exactly what he wanted, but he should be open to kind of exploring what she's
Yeah.
trying to communicate
Oh,
with it. Like,
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I will say this: any good director, come in with your notes to the rehearsal room, but be ready to throw them out if given the collaboration, something else better appears. Unless it's something that is vital to your image of like this has to be this way because it drives another point that I'm making. Like for me, when I direct, I make a lot of notes about a scene,
Mhm.
but basically, my first thing is I have my notes, but let's run the scene by the actors first. Let them run it. Let me see what they come up with, and then we'll find a way to meld
yeah,
a final product together. But I think also Jerome Robbins, once again, hindsight being 2020, comes from a different age
he
of
does, and I'm glad.
Broadway and of coaches.
Like, he does, and I'm glad we've moved away from that age, hopefully. But you always
Yes.
hear horror stories about this and that director all the time.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
but even though he is perhaps like in this way a relic of a bygone era,
Mhm.
people who are still active like Stephen Sondheim who like condone it and be like,
Yeah.
oh yes, it's necessary because that's
Mhm.
what he had to do to make the work the way it is. Like,
Yeah.
I don't see, you know, these are people who, are very influential and respected, and if
Mhm.
they're still like
Praising Jerome Robbins.
yeah, for this reason, that's a problem. Don't, like, you can
Yeah.
praise him all you want for the great work he did, but
Yeah.
but
His
yeah,
tactics, don't praise his
yeah,
tactics.
and
Yeah.
I see a lot of praise for those tactics in the bookends of this segment of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
documentary.
And I mean, like, even in the West Side Story documentary about the making of the movie,
Mhm.
like Rita Moreno discusses how her feet were bleeding
Yeah.
because she had to run America so many times. But then they also talk about how great Natalie Wood was with Jerome Robbins. Like, there's her ballet sequence on the roof
Mhm.
at the after the Rumble, and he goes, he made her work that scene so many times. Many times he made her rework it and rework it, and she was tired, but she reworked it until the very end, and they had a great collaborative relationship. Once again, I think it just comes down to, I don't know where my point was going, but yeah, definitely don't praise the tactic.
Yeah, I think we're
Praise the
going in circles
genius.
here.
Yeah,
We've kind of
exactly.
exhausted this point, but yeah, that's where I stand on it. Like,
Yeah,
it's
and I agree. Yeah, and
mhm.
I'm in agreement with you. Like, yeah, the bottle dance is brilliant, but for him to berate and make audience like actors cry,
Mhm.
that is not okay.
Yeah,
That is never.
it's just
Okay.
not worth it. No matter how great the art is,
Yeah,
it's not the point of making art.
yeah, exactly. The
Mhm.
art of making art, as
Yes.
Sondheim would say.
All right, let's talk about If I Were a Rich Man.
Yes, yeah, because they make a very bold declaration in this documentary where Lin-Manuel Miranda has I don't have the exact quote, but basically he says, let's see here, the song "If I Were a Rich Man" is the most universal aspirational song in the Broadway musical theater canon. And Ryan, do you agree with this statement?
I yes and no.
Okay.
It's not because I can specifically cite, oh, well, it's because such and such other I Want song is much more
Right.
aspirational. Like, there are maybe, you know, this might shock you, but this is actually one of my least favorite songs in the show, and maybe
Oh,
part of that is kind of resentfully because I know it is so many people's favorites, and it's like, I just have
yeah.
to be a contrarian in this way. But like,
Of course you do, Ryan.
I and this might go back partly to some of like the specificity of like especially Jewish things like that we were talking about. And don't worry, I'm not going to say like, yes, Jews only want money. Don't worry, I'm not going there. But like,
Okay.
but everybody wants money because we live under capitalism, and and so I
That's
agree
the way to
with
get it.
Lin.
To grow in the system.
Yeah, so I agree with Lynn's point that, so many people can relate to this, and not just poor people like Tevye, but even rich people always want to be richer. And like, that's just kind of the way capitalism is structured. And, it can never be enough for anyone, whether you're poor like Tevye or rich like Laser Wolf. Everybody always wants more.
Yes.
And so everyone, and trust me, if you're like seeing the show on Broadway, you probably, aren't poor like Tevye.
No, you definitely have a few pennies to spare.
Yeah, you can still be watching this and being like, yes, I have a lot of money, but I'm not Elon Musk rich, so therefore I can aspire to. And that's kind of like, what's the thing that they always say about like the American dream, that like nobody's ever impoverished. They're a slightly embarrassed billionaire or temporarily embarrassed billionaire. Like any moment they can make it big, because that's the American dream of prosperity, but chances are they won't. And it's that aspiration that prevents people from organizing collectively to actually maybe do something about this very flawed system.
Right.
So yes, for as long as, I agree that there's something universal about it under the current system, where that like, but if we maybe did something about that system, I would like to see a day where this song maybe is a lot less considered universal. But it also, because under the system, money is such like a great equalizer in a way that it's the thing that everybody needs, everybody wants. It works in this way. Whereas I think of a lot of other classic I Want songs are always, even if there's something very like universal and thematic at the core of them, it's always about wanting something very specific.
Right.
Like I think like The Wizard and I from Wicked, for example, like I can't personally relate to wanting to be the protege of the Wizard of Oz because that's so foreign to my like lived experience, but I can relate to wanting more money because I don't have enough of it. Like, or I think, I don't know. It's interesting that Lin is the one making this point in the documentary, because I think Hamilton has two I Want songs in it. There's My Shot is the obvious one, and that is kind of like a very vague, it's not just about wanting to fight for the revolution, but it is about just wanting to prove yourself and make something of yourself. And then like, so, and I think that's something much more universal that a lot of people can grapple or like kind of like hang their hat on. But my personal favorite song, and just, well, not even just my favorite I Want song, but my favorite song in Hamilton is Wait For It, which is the villain's I Want song, which or our villain storyteller co-protagonist, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, Aaron Burr gets an I Want song, and it's in direct opposition to the goals of the protagonist. Like, but yeah, I think his I Want song is just about not wanting to wait for it anymore, to not be in stasis, to go for the things. And, it sort of dances on this line of specificity, because it does go into his specific situation, like with his, grandfather was a fire and brimstone preacher. I don't need to sing the whole thing here, but like,
oh, come on.
But yeah, I think the best I Want songs, like, I don't know, because, and when we talk about I Want songs, we're often talking about Disney Renaissance period, which was kind of.
Well, I mean, the Disney Renaissance, they, how do I put this? They basically brought the I Want song's always been in a musical, all the way back to
in musicals,
Story with a Fringe on the Top.
Okay, when people of our generation talk about I Want songs, they're often talking about,
I think a part of part of my world.
Yeah, and like, but that's another one. It's like, sure, we can talk about something universal at the core of just wanting to, you feel different and you want to be accepted. But at the same time, it's so specific of I want legs. Like, it's like, I can't relate to that specifically.
But I get the thematic thing you're going for.
So yeah, I think what If I Were a Rich Man does well is it has that sort of like thematic vagueness that a good I Want song has, but anchors the specific in something that is very relatable, again, under the very flawed economic system we live under.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, basically, I'm in agreement with you. I mean, in the fact that we have this number of If I Were a Rich Man. And I agree with you. Like, it is not one of my favorite songs. I mean, if you go listen to our season 2 premiere episode, it actually did not make my top 3. It would have been a 4th. But ultimately, the song, it is a very bold song because there are a lot of great I Want songs. Like there's the "Oh I Want" from My Fair Lady, right? Which is just about not wanting to be in poverty, which is very relatable. You have the whole song Camelot, which is I would argue is an I Want song from the musical Camelot. Uh, Somewhere That's Green from Little Shop. Right? So there's a whole bunch of them, but yeah, you're right. What makes If I Were a Rich Man work more than anything else is that it does the thematic and specific together, and it's one of these universal concepts of we all would wish to have that big tall house with rooms by the dozen right in the middle of town, to be that influential person and sit by the eastern wall or wherever you choose to sit. I still don't get that whole reference of the Eastern Wall, but I get the idea of what he's saying, of why he wants to be there, and just having that time, as he says, to just sit and pray and just sit and think and not worry about when is my next meal, when it like when is my next paycheck coming, and all those concepts are so human and realistic that, and it comes right from Shlomo Aleichem. I mean, they show that those lyrics are based, as he says in the documentary. I hope they don't show Aleicham's work, because I just stole a lot of his lyric or a lot of his text and just reworded it.
That's just what good adaptation does, is
exactly
contextualize it like it's
exactly. So for me, I think when I wrote this question out, I was like, I don't know if I agree. But then as I've been thinking today and listening to that song, I go, yeah, no, I agree. This is the most universal, aspirational I Want song of the Broadway canon, because of its power to reach everybody in every corner of the world. Because everybody has this dream of winning the lottery, winning that 60 million Lotto Max, and being on Easy Street and being and just enjoying the high life. And as you said, it's all spawned from a very unbalanced economic system. but even before this, economic capitalism really became a thing. Even if you go back to the Greeks and the Romans, this was a concept that was was aspired to. Because class is always a thing. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Class is a thing that people aspire to move up the ladder.
Someday, who knows?
Someday. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
Like, were we almost done our questions? I think
so. More. There's one more.
Yeah, let's close out with this one.
Yeah. So I'll kick it off. So this documentary features the show's Yiddish production. And Ryan, my question to you is, do you think there's another musical that would work as well in its native language as this Yiddish production? Because if you look at the production show, this Yiddish production, it was extended several times. It has a cast album for an off-Broadway show, which is very rare. It was well received by critics. Like, this was a show that started off as like a Yiddish community thing, and then it grew to being this big off-Broadway hit that now potentially, after they're saying, may actually go out on tour as a new touring show. So it's and they're also apparently going to be releasing a libretto in Yiddish, so Jewish companies around the world can do it in its native Yiddish language. So is there another musical you can think of that would work
specifically with like a language change?
Yeah, like a language change. Again, a predominantly English speaking audience. If you swap the language to what the musical's native language would be, i.e., Les Mis French,
which Les Mis was already French from the start, so not the best example. But yeah, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah. So I struggled to think of like a good answer to this, and I'm afraid I don't think I came up with a good one. Yeah. And I think there's a clear reason for why Fiddler is quite unique in this position, and that is because I can think of very few musicals that are, like American musicals. I can't speak to like a global type of contexts, but I can think of very few American musicals where the creative team behind it is equally both of and not of the culture being represented. And that is because we have these American Ashkenazi Jews who are all behind this show.
Right.
So they feel this kind of cultural affinity to that old country, that like, the shtetl life that is being represented in the play, but are not themselves living in it, and they're not themselves Yiddish speakers. So
Right.
it kind of, it threads this needle very well that they weren't appropriating anything necessarily by telling this story.
Right.
Like the kind of, I was trying to think of a good example. I'm just like, okay, a Thai version of The King and I, but I'm like, well, that doesn't really work the same way, because Rodgers and Hammerstein weren't Thai. They were appropriating a Thai story, if you can even really call it that. I don't know, the historicity of like.
I wouldn't, just because it's based off a Welsh school teacher's book.
Oh, well, that's even
that
worse.
they then adapted into the musical.
Okay,
so it wasn't even like from like a Thai story. It was an British storybook.
Something, a similar
or
example,
autobiography diary.
Sure. A similar example that came to my mind, to stick with Rodgers and Hammerstein for a little while, is I think there might be something powerful to doing a rendition of Oklahoma in Cherokee or Choctaw, like an actual like indigenous language from Oklahoma, that would maybe talk about, we have this story about all these white people who are very uncritical about forming a state, a U.S. state in this land, and there's no indigenous characters in the piece, even though the title is Oklahoma, which is a Choctaw word. So I think maybe that could be like, I would obviously want an entirely indigenous creative team, like, to do this. I wouldn't just like you have your kind of Yiddish creative team doing this, but I don't feel like I'm in a position to say like, this is the thing that should be done. I would like to hear from those communities themselves to see if that's something they are interested in reappropriating or reclaiming in that way, because it might not be the story they want to tell, and I wouldn't blame them for it. And then I have my silly answer that I'll close out on, and that's, I want there to be a rendition of Cats in the original Cat. So every song is just meow, 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 meow. I that would just tickle my funny bone. But no, that's my way of saying I didn't have an actual good answer to this question.
No, that's funny. That is funny. So I think for me, I think there's very few musicals that could do this concept, because Fiddler on the Roof has earned this ability to do this show, because this production in Yiddish spanned well beyond just the Jewish community that spoke Yiddish. And that's because the story and the music are so well known to the masses that they can come in and follow this piece very easily and not be totally jarred. Like they tried doing the West Side Story, where all the sharks spoke and sung in Spanish. And ultimately, and actually Lin-Manuel Miranda helped write those Spanish translations for this 2009 revival. And ultimately, they actually had to end up changing it back to English, because general audiences were not connecting, and they were complaining that, what is this? Why am I being sung to in Spanish? Even though technically that is correct. The sharks would not be speaking English a majority of the time. If they were alone, they would be speaking a majority of Spanish, except for maybe Anita, who was trying to be more American. Ergo, she would sing America in English.
Right.
But yeah, and I think West Side Story is another one of those shows that you could do it. I still think audiences were open to that in 2009. I think if we did it today, there'd be a much more welcoming concept. Because but once again, it just depends on the audience's openness and willingness to go that direction. I think Les Mis, being sung in its original French, could potentially work, because once again, that music is so well known and iconic. Everybody knows I Dreamed a Dream, even if you did sing Je me réveille de notre vie. Everybody knows what that line is, even if you hear it in a different language, and the emotion is still there. But once again, I think it's one of these things of, you have to know your audience. Like, I would love to see a Miss Saigon done in Vietnamese, where all the actors, unless they're interacting with American characters, sing and talk in Vietnamese, because
that could be interesting. Yeah,
like that could work. But I know that probably only works cinematically, and you'd have to subtitle it, because if they came out on stage and talked like that, audiences wouldn't understand it and would get very upset, because unfortunately Ryan, as you pointed out in our previous segment, a lot of our audiences are not immigrant, non-WASPist audiences. That is still very much a predominant section of our audience. Ergo, we unfortunately, even though I'm all for opening up the concepts further, but we do have to kind of, I don't know if the right word is cater, but we do have to kind of, I'll go cater. Accommodate
whether
that.
we like it or not. And
yes,
well, I think there's something to be said about. I'm not sure what the quite word is, but I feel like we've reached a point, just kind of culturally, sort of in the age of globalization, if you will, where I think certainly that like upper crust waspier audience maybe is open to cultural tourism in this way.
Exactly.
Like, even
and
if
that's why I think like a Spanish version of West Side Story would now work. Meanwhile, back in 2009, that was definitely not a thing. Hence why they went that direction at first. It was well received, but then they ultimately had to change it back because audiences were not responding to it, and were all openly complaining about this change. Even though I'm like, Anita would sing A Boy Like That in Spanish because she's lost Bernardo, and she is regressing and going back to the safe spot of singing in Spanish. Well, then Maria has a change of singing in English because now she is becoming more American. There's like dramaturgically a way they did it, which was really smart. I really did enjoy that.
There's also nothing saying that any of the ideas we're proposing in response to this question need to happen on Broadway. Like,
no, it can happen anywhere.
Yeah, you could do like the production you're proposing of West Side Story in Puerto Rico, and that would be like, that could be a very interesting I'm sure,
absolutely.
And you wouldn't have to worry about the audience not understanding or not getting it because it's a mostly Spanish speaking population.
Exactly. So I think once again it just comes down to, unfortunately, even if it's a great concept, you have to know the audience you're wanting to get, and your audience has to be open and willing to go that direction, which is too bad because there's a lot of great shows that I think you could do it too, but you just have to look at it, see how it works, and then see if your audience is there to support that concept. And if it is, great, go for it. Because I do like this idea of introducing more of these native languages to these musicals. I think that is a fascinating concept that could work really well. So I will. I think that's that. Is there anything else you want to talk about with this documentary? I think we've exhausted
this is going to be a long one, folks. Thanks for sticking around with us. But you know what? We have spent so much time, you and I, both in scenes of Cup episodes that have been cut for time, where we go on tangents about Fiddler. It's nice that we finally gave ourselves this space to really just get into all of the Fiddlerness. And so
we diddle our heart's content.
So thank you for suggesting this. I enjoyed the documentary. If anyone's still sticking around and is on the fence about whether or not to watch the documentary, go for it. You'll probably enjoy it.
It's like an hour and a half. It's like a 90-minute, easy to watch documentary. Very impactful, very moving, well done documentary.
And if it's been a long time, watch Fiddler again, because Fiddler's great.
Yeah, I think it's available on Amazon Prime is where you can watch that. So definitely check it out. It's a great movie. Still holds up today, and directed by a Canadian director, Norman Jewison, who is not Jewish. And I think that's one of my favorite funny jokes of that entire documentary is that he knows so much about Judaism, he'll convert to Judaism, but he'll change his name to Norman Christensen.
Very funny.
It is very funny. But there we go, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Ryan, give us a classic Ryan Borochovitz send-off.
Hard to find me on social media, so don't even bother, even though many accounts probably do exist. So I don't know, do what you want. But just send all that love to Cup of Hemlock instead, because basically everything I share on the one social media I'm even a little active on is just the Cup episodes when they go live. So you're not missing much. How about you, Mac? Plug yourself.
Well, you can follow me at Mackenzie Horner on all social media platforms. If you didn't get enough of Mac talking about Fiddler, you can check out our season 2 opening episode where myself and my podcast co-host Autumn did a 2-hour deep dive into this musical, its production team, the production history, the songs. It was an experience, let me tell you, making that episode. So if you want more Fiddler and Mac, there's where you go. But other than that, you can always follow Cup of Hemlock on our podcast feed if you want to take us on the go. We are still open to accepting sonnet submissions if you're still interested in doing that. Link is in the description below. And other than that, everybody, I guess for now we will say thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you. Bye.